Welcome to the National Gathering of Capital Commission. We exist to bring gospel hope and spiritual strength to your governing leaders and their supporting staff. Our focus is ministering to the souls of the people who hold the office. Our presence is nonpartisan because we believe the gospel is powerful without an agenda. We proclaim clear Bible exposition and the gospel of Jesus. 16 words. 16 words set America apart from all other nations. This session focuses on the importance, the threats, and the protecting of those 16 words. It should concern every American, regardless of belief. It should most certainly concern followers of Jesus. This topic is one of the most controversial and pressing issues today. Some are calling it the battle of our own lifetime. History tells us the beginning of those 16 words, the journey of the Puritan pilgrims on the Mayflower. What drove them from Europe to New England? That life-risking voyage was for the treasure of religious liberty. Those Puritan pilgrims were guided by the Lord. One of their leaders, John Winthrop, preaching the text, "You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hid." Jesus' words. His application point was clear. This nation would be that shining city on a hill, to shine and live out the gospel, to live accountable and reliant to God. This atmosphere of God's grace and light birthed those 16 words that set America apart from all nations. Clearly, no humanistic theory, science, or academia birthed the idea of America. That idea came about from the worship and affection to God from our founding fathers and their understanding of the importance faith and religion played. The outcome, a few hundred years later, the very First Amendment of our Constitution's Bill of Rights. It reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." The first 16 words of our First Amendment. We welcome you to our topical discussion. Our first focus tonight is going to be on that area of the importance of religious freedom. And Kansas State Minister Dave Depew, start us off with that most important question to our ambassador.
Well, Ambassador Brownback, please share the mission of your agency. Give us an overview of what you do.
What I'd like to say we do is that we take what the Puritans came here for and spread it around the world and push to see that it's implemented around the world. So they came here fleeing religious persecution and to establish then, okay, we want to practice our faith here. We want to be peaceful about it, but we want to practice our faith the way we want to practice it. We view that, the United States government, as a God-given right. That this is something that you have by virtue of being a human being. It doesn't matter what citizen of any country you are, you have this right, and we believe it applies to everybody, everywhere, all the time, in every country, and we're seeking to put that in place, whether it's pushing for policy changes in countries, advocating for allowing people to be out of prison if they've been put in jail for their faith. If there's communal violence, pushing the government to protect religious minorities that are persecuted in that nation, so that a Puritan in Nigeria or India or China or Russia or Venezuela, anywhere around the world, can practice their faith freely without having to leave their shores and come to America. Now we're the only country in the world I don't have any portfolio in is the United States. So I don't have any authority here, but the rest of the world, this is our mission and we push hard for it.
Well, Mr. Ambassador, you're the fifth in this position. The creation of this agency is a bipartisan effort, shows its importance throughout the world. Speak on that, on how this is a bipartisan effort.
Well, it is a bipartisan effort. The act was last renewed just before I came into this office and at the end of the Obama administration, and it was passed by a Republican Congress to a Democrat president, and it didn't have unanimous approval, but close to it. It is a bipartisan. I work quite a bit with Speaker Nancy Pelosi, particularly on issues regarding China. She's been very strong in support of the Tibetans in particular, and we work hard to do it. That's part of the reason why I have no portfolio in the United States, because when we passed the act, there's division of opinion about what the scale of religious freedom is in the United States, and most of these cases now are making their way to the U.S. Supreme Court for the U.S. Supreme Court to decide religious freedom. So we thought we want this office to be bipartisan, and the way it wouldn't be bipartisan is if we got involved in American issues, so can't be involved there, everywhere else. It's an international religious freedom position.
Mr. Ambassador, those cases coming to the U.S. Supreme Court is part of the reason why we're having this topic. This is a very controversial and it's a very important topic for today. And we're going to continue on this importance. I'm going to ask Missouri State Chaplain John Battaglia to bring in a question.
Mr. Ambassador, what a pleasure to have you
Thanks.
with us today. Thank you for serving.
Sure.
So my question is, why was religious liberty so cherished by our founding fathers that they placed it first in the Bill of Rights?
I don't know that I can accurately be able to go back into their mindset, but you can observe some things. Number one, a number of them came here for that right, and coming from Europe to the United States at that time was not a simple thing of getting on a plane in London and landing a few hours later in New York, obviously. I mean, this is a perilous voyage, and you're leaving everything behind, and you're not going back. And yet, something drove them to come here. And for the most part, many of them, it was about religious freedom. My soul is so critically important to me, and I am being persecuted there. I want to start in a new place. And they did. And then it became to them, because a number of the colonies had a little different cut of this. There was Quakers in one place, and there was different faiths in various places. So they were starting to go, now wait a minute, how are we going to all get along? And this is such a central issue to us. We've just got to guarantee religious freedom. But notice too, they say that Congress cannot impinge upon this. It isn't that you don't have religious freedom, it's that the Congress can't tell you what to do. You've got religious freedom. And now you're seeing all these sorts of cases to really try to get into the very granular aspect of this. What if your faith is such that you don't believe that you can give abortion pills to somebody and you're a pharmacist? Okay, you've got a right to the health care, but I've got a right to practice my faith. How are we going to accommodate that? And that's been what the struggle has been, is to figure out kind of that accommodation. But I think what they observed, which is true today, is this is such a foundational issue. You've got to get it right before you can move forward to the others. And that's what we've been saying to the rest of the world now on the Human Rights Project writ large. You got to get this one right before you can move on to the others, because it is so basic and foundational. And religion can often be used as a tool of war, and has been in its history. We want religion to be peace. We want it, but the only way you get religious peace is religious freedom for everybody. You got to guarantee it for everybody. You and I may agree, disagree on religion, but we've got to respect each other's pursuit, each other's journey on this. And if we do, and then have love for one another, we're not going to be fighting about it, even if we may not agree.
It's really interesting to me because it sounds to me like the Founding Fathers' voice came from their convictions and their values, and their perspective came from their foresight as to what might be.
It was, and it proved to be, phenomenally insightful and forward-looking. Here we are, getting 250 years later, getting close to that, and their insight is probably more important today than any time in the history of mankind, because we had a ministerial, and these are foreign ministers from all the world, gathered together in Washington last year on religious freedom. Tony Blair addressed the group as well, and he was saying, if the world doesn't get this religious freedom issue right, we're going to descend into a lot more conflicts. If the world does get it right, we're going to have an ascension of peace. Because even if you and I disagree, if you're Muslim and I'm Jewish and he's Christian, but we agree to protect each other's right to choose, we're not fighting. But if we don't, then you know what? I don't agree with you. And I may even feel like I have the right to attack you for you being so misled in what you believe. And that's actually what's happening in much of the world today, is many of the conflicts today have a major religious component to it of you are different than me, and I feel I have a right to attack and even kill you.
Mr. Ambassador, it's an honor to be with you today. Your title has the word international in it, and I can tell that's part of the passion of your life. What are the challenges when it comes to China, North Korea, Iraq, Iran, and what are some of your successes?
Oh, the challenges are immense. Here you got China, the largest population country in the world, and one that actually seeks to dominate the world. With its view. Communism has had that for some period of time. And yet communism historically and even today has trouble with faith. They just can't abide by people that have any sort of allegiance to another authority. That was true in the Soviet era. It's true of China today. So they're at war with faith. Because people of faith are going, yes, I'm a part of this country, but what really drives me is my faith. And in the United States, we accommodate that. We say, of course, we hope we have lots of people of faith, because you can't really operate a free society well without people having self-governance, and that often involves a faith ability. So what we're finding is that you have to really go at the governmental systems. In China, we've got to push them. Look, in your constitution, you guarantee religious freedom. You are part of the UN Declaration of Human Rights. You've got to guarantee this for your own people. In North Korea, we push hard, but we haven't been effective in being able to get that regime to change. In Iraq, we've got some more levers and ability, and we're getting some religious freedom, although we had a horrible genocide of Yazidis and Christians in northern Iraq 6 years ago now. And Iran is one of the most totalitarian type regimes. And interestingly, it's a totalitarian Shia Muslim regime and probably one of the fastest growing Christian churches in the world. Which only goes to prove the point that if you force people to do something, they will fight with you. And you don't get there by a gunpoint. You get there by changing hearts. And you're talking to people about their heart. And that's how it happens, not by a government and the tip of a sword.
Thank you.
Outstanding. Well, we've focused on the importance of religious freedom. And we want to transition to this next section, which certainly is controversial and really a topic of interest there are many books being written this year on the right to believe or free to believe, and it just brings us to just how controversial that is. So there are many threats. We've narrowed down our questions, but we're going to move to the threats on religious freedom. And so our first question in this comes from Georgia Senator Donzella James.
Mr. Ambassador, it's an honor and privilege to speak with you today. I am happy to pose this question. Thank you very much. I'd like to know if you feel, with the current situation and status, if religious freedom is at risk.
You know, I hold to the adage that Ronald Reagan put forward about freedom is always one generation away from being lost. It's never secure. Each generation has to fight for freedom and for its own freedom, and I think that applies to religious freedom. That it is always just one generation away from being lost. Now, we've got the First Amendment. You've got now a series of Supreme Court cases that are coming out defining the particulars of this coming forward. Generally, religious freedom is winning these Supreme Court cases. Some people try to bifurcate the issue into a freedom of worship or a freedom of religion. Freedom of worship being you can do in your own house of worship what you believe in, but you can't take it out to the marketplace. Freedom of religion saying, no, you get to take it with you wherever you are. And people saying, okay, which is it really? And most of this seems to be tending more towards the freedom of religion, that you have that right wherever you are all the time, as long as it's peaceful. Okay, you break out and you're trying to attack somebody else, then that's another matter. But I think these are constant issues that people have to be vigilant about. As I say, I don't have portfolio in the United States, but we sure see it around the world, and you see lots of different subtle ways that this gets persecuted. It may be that, okay, if you believe a certain way, we're not going to allow you to go to these schools. Or it may be that somehow if you believe a certain way, you can't ever seem to get into these sets of apartments. Or it may be more direct, like what the Chinese are doing, that if you believe this way, we're going to put you in a concentration camp. And once you get out, we're going to maintain a authoritarian system that watches you constantly. And I want to end on this point because it's one that I'm most concerned about right now, is that in religious persecution, I think in the future you're going to see less people may be killed for their faith, less people incarcerated for their faith. But you're going to see this proliferation of systems of where you're constantly monitored, where there's cameras everywhere, where there's artificial intelligence that knows who you are, where you are, and it may start to get manipulated where people can't buy and sell and operate publicly if they're not of a favored view. Now that's what we're seeing taking place in Western China today. Those systems, those camera systems, artificial intelligence, algorithm systems that are saying, if you believe, in this case it's mostly a Muslim faith that they're trying to put down, if you believe this way and you go to the mosque, we're not going to let you get that apartment, we're not going to let you enter this building, we're not going to let you travel, we're not going to let your kids go to this school, we're not going to let you operate in the field of commerce. And it's those sorts of overall virtual police state systems, virtual prisons, that I'm most concerned about going into the future, because the technology and the systems already exist. And it just doesn't take, it's not that expensive or difficult to put them in place. And the systems are already operating. Those are the ones that we're pushing back the hardest on and just saying, we do not want these things in place here. And we think, and we do everything we can to warn the free world about them. We don't want these systems moving forward.
Mr. Ambassador, our next question comes from Arkansas State Senator Kim Hammer.
I guess my question would be, what do you see the balance between freedom of speech and government overreach? And how do we achieve that balance to where each can stay on their respective side of the line and complement each other instead of trying to compete to take away from each other?
Great question, and it's one we constantly wrestle with. But the way I see it is you do the utmost to favor people's individual human rights. Our government was initially designed to be a government of maximum freedom and limited government. That was the founders' original vision of it, and it was this beautiful vision. I think really it's a God-given vision. It's the way God gave it to us. Maximum freedom. You get to choose. And the flourishing of the human spirit that happens when you choose is an amazing thing. So I always think, you favor free speech as long as it's not actually damaging to somebody else. That you've got the right to say and believe what you believe. Now, if it's not peaceful, then you start getting into those lines of where government is protecting the rights of somebody else, and then that becomes the difficult line. You've had now a series of cases starting to be developed of people of faith saying, "I don't want to do this." A cake baker, somebody that's baking a cake for a homosexual wedding, and saying, I don't agree with this wedding ceremony, and so I don't want to bake this cake. Okay, now where do we draw that line on these matters? And that's what the courts are being engaged in now, and I think increasingly will. It does appear that the courts are going to say, you've got religious freedom. This is a foundational right, and that's going to be protected. But I think that's the real key rub we're seeing right now.
Could I just interact and tag off of that question? There are many that believe that legislation is not necessarily that which is restricting religious freedom in America the most, but rather more like peer pressure, social norms. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I even asked one of the U.S. Supreme Court justices about this one time. Was saying, do you think there'll be protection for religious freedom in the United States? And said absolutely. I mean, it's a foundational right. Now, culturally, you may feel so much pressure that you aren't interested in practicing it, but you'll have the right to religious freedom. It's just whether culturally you feel that you want to take the pressure that comes with practicing a faith.
So one of our action points, certainly coming from this discussion, is we need to tactfully and wisely stand up for our religious freedom as we live our lives.
Absolutely. I mean, to me, and the difficulty will be, more than anything, the difficulty will be in just how you interact with the culture.
Yeah.
And you do see that in a number of places around the world. When you decide to take a little different tack than the dominant culture is, you're the nail that sticks up for the hammer to hit. And a lot of people don't want to be that nail.
Right. Outstanding. We certainly think of praying for our leaders as being the priority action to fight the good fight of faith. We all talk about the good fight of faith, and that's something that we as a ministry promote through our pray1tim2.org tool, and we are excited to do that. But you're absolutely right. It's easy for me to be apathetic about issues in our nation that are very troubling, and so that is something that in this day and age we just don't have that liberty to stay on the couch. We really have to aggressively do that, and I think there's things we can do, like praying for our leaders. The New York Times Tribune editor made this statement saying, "It is impossible to enslave mentally and socially a Bible-reading people. The principles of the Bible are the groundwork of human freedom." And I think we saw that rising up in our early pilgrims, what drove them to come to America, as you mentioned. And so these are actions: prayer, reading your Bible, standing up for your liberty. These are things that are so important to do. And those are all peaceful things, by the way, as you've mentioned that. Well, we want to thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for being with us today as we looked at the importance of religious freedom, the threats, and the action steps that we can all take. And thank you for giving us the insights into what is happening in the world. I think one of the action steps I've learned in this discussion is just how important it is for me to have dialogue with people that believe differently than me, and befriend them. And I think in a sense that's really what Jesus did when you read the New Testament. Yes. And so the great commandment to love God with all our heart, to love our neighbor as ourselves, still lands in the action step of what we're trying to do here. And so thank you for helping us to see that and how effective that is around the world. I want to thank you for joining us in this topical discussion on is your religious freedom at risk? And thank you, Mr. Ambassador, again, for the time you've taken to be with us today on this wonderful and most important topic. Our state ministers and our national mission thanks you for joining this broadcast today. And we welcome you to help us advance the gospel, bringing spiritual strength and gospel hope to your governing leaders. For more information on this broadcast or our upcoming broadcast or this ministry, you can look to capitalcom.org. Thank you for joining us today.
Tune in to Overcomers TV on your favorite app or streaming platform. It's time to overcome.